What draws you to the rhinos as much? The rhino rats?
I don't know. I went to Daytona one year when I was younger, and like one of the first tables I went by, you had a pair of adults and then a bunch of hatchlings, and I'd never seen them before. They weren't in my books like when I was growing up. You have like your staples that were in the books like in the early '90s, but the rhino rats were never in there, and I just thought they were like the coolest things. Bright, green snake with the long, nose, and they were rat snakes. I was really into rat snakes when I was younger, as most kids are, and I don't know, something just drew me to them. And if I remember correctly, they were like $75 a piece, on the table. And it's like, wow, that's a lot of money. And like, I kick myself now because they've obviously skyrocketed in price. But ever since I saw them, I just had to have them. And I got my first pair from Danny Mendez at Urban Jungles. I know he was breeding them for a little bit. He did a lot with Amazon tree boas too. And once I got that first pair, hatchlings, I was hooked. And so every one I saw throughout the years, I just bought, and I just like them a lot. They're a neat snake. They're relatively small, and they're like arboreal, terrestrial, aquatic. So they do a little bit of everything. They're big water lovers. They love to climb. They're pretty active. Not as active as the Barons racers, but it's a really cool display species. And I just think they weren't getting enough appreciation. Like when I got into them, it was still sort of like a relatively uncommon species. Not a ton of people were breeding. Rob Stone was another one that was breeding a lot of them. And I don't know. I was just hooked. I just think they're the coolest thing. And now, I don't know if you saw, but last year, the year before, they separated. There's a second species, essentially, of Rhino Rat Snake, the Hainan rhino. And that one's from, a specific island off the coast there. And that one's really beautiful as well. And somehow they were already in captivity in Europe. And so I made sure I got myself a pair, and they're growing up now, and can't wait to see what they look like as adults. But I just always...
it's been a while since I remember seeing the paper or whatever the article that was posted about that, but visually, are they quite different, or is there can you just by looking tell the difference?
So there's two scales right in between the eye and the nostril. There's two in the new species and one in Boulengerai.
Okay.
And the Hainans, which is the new species, also lack the eye stripe. Most of them have like a bluish black eye stripe that goes along there, and the Hainans don't. They seem to have a longer nose, and they're a little bit of a brighter green and sort of patternless. However, I do have Boulengerai that sort of meet that description aside from the scale. They don't have the eye stripe. They're really lime green, no pattern. But I also have Boulengerai that are on one side, they have the Hainan scalation, and on the other side, they have Boulengerai scalation. And so I don't know if they were accidental hybrids or maybe just more work needs to be done, like a larger sample for the research. I'm not sure. But yeah, so far, there is, a little bit of a difference you can see when looking at them. And if you look at the paper, they have like a really good side-by-side comparison of both, and you can see a difference. Yeah.
And what's really nice about that species, or at least I think I've only held an adult once, but they're so slender. Like they're such a slender body, which means, they take up less space in the enclosure. So you could provide them a lot of space very easily, because when they're curled up, they're pretty small.
Yeah, they are really small, especially compared to some other rat snakes. Like they're real slender. I think my biggest one ever might have been 5.5 feet. It was a male. He was just an absolute monster, but the rest of them are no bigger than 3.5 feet. Like they're a relatively small species, very slender, very arboreal. If you give them space, they're going to explore all of it. And one thing I like to do with like species that I keep is go onto iNaturalist, and I like to find, images of them in the wild. What's the habitat that they're living in? Like, how were they found? Were they crossing a road? Were they swimming across a stream? What were they doing? Climbing a tree? And oftentimes with Rhino Rat Snakes, I think there's only like maybe 5 sightings on iNaturalist or recordings of them. But there's one of the one going across a stream, and there's one actively like submerged in a stream. So I know that they have like a very big love for water, and so I make sure I give all of mine like a nice big water bowl, and they use it all the time. They're always in there swimming around. When they're little, a lot of people have trouble getting them to eat rodents, because I think in the wild they do eat things like little minnows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you give them like rosy reds or something as babies, they're on it just like that, which I try not to do. because I
You
never,
try to start them on pinkies right away?
yeah, and I've gotten really good at it over the years. But I don't trust like the source of rosy reds. I don't know what kind of junk water that they're kept in or what they're fed, and so I try to get them on pinkies and avoid any possible issues with feeding them fish.
So what do you do to make sure that, like, when you say you're good at it,
So
you're making
there,
those things look like a fish?
sometimes what I do for one is I keep them all together. Once they hatch, I keep them all together until they shed, and I'll just throw a bunch of frozen thawed pinkies in there. Keep them in a small container, and a bunch of them will just eat just like that. And I take those, I separate them out, and I try it again with the ones that are still together. But they're real spicy when they're little. They're real bitey, and so a lot of times if you hold them in one hand, sort of like maybe with about that much snake, a couple inches of snake, and then you just hold the pinky over here, they'll bite it. And if you do it enough times, they'll usually just grab it and they'll just get mad and start working it down. And once they get that first one down, they're usually pretty good. I've actually had bad luck with force feeding them. I've had them decline really rapidly. I guess the stress of force feeding. Some species are just really sensitive to it. So I really try to just do the assist feeding by holding them and just sort of just pissing them off a little bit. It sounds kind of shitty, but it works. And those tend to grow, just as fast as the ones that are eating on their own. But once you do that 2 or 3 times, like they just catch on. Tuna juice is another helpful thing.
Oh yeah.
Out there wants to try that, but yeah, that's it.
And then as far as the water dish, you said you have a large. What are you using for a water dish?
Kind of like cat litter pans.
Okay.
Yeah. That. But you have to, like, if I could set all my rhinos up in a way where they had drains, I would absolutely do that, because the second you put clean water in there, they're defecating.
They pee. Yeah.
One of the biggest issues, if you're on the Rhino Rat Snake Room Facebook page, one of the biggest issues that people post is this like sort of like a pimply, blistery thing that happens to rhinos. They get these like white blisters underneath their scales, and I believe it's a bacterial infection, and it can go systemic really quickly, and it can kill them. I've seen a lot of rhinos die from this. So clean water is like the number one most important thing for rhino rat keeping. Give them something that they can soak in. They love it, but make sure that you're cleaning that daily, if not twice daily, because they
really quickly, that often.
Yeah. Oh, they're rat snakes. And so, the way I feed my rat snakes is small meals often. Even my adults are not getting, jumbo mice. They're getting something like a small mouse or, that a couple times a week. So I try to do small meals often. The Barons racers eat even more. Certain times of the year, the rhino rats won't touch food at all. The males, especially for like 6 months, sometimes they'll go off food. But small meals often, so they're pooping a lot. It's a colubrid. They're going to poop a lot, and got to keep that water clean. Otherwise, they get some pretty bad skin issues.
Yeah, no, that's a really good tip. And then for the Barons racers, I was actually looking at Baron. I've always loved the snakes that have like the teal blue coloration, and obviously Barons have that. And so I was